I want to start with you, Jake, and your understanding that this hearing tomorrow is perhaps the one that has been foreshadowed the most, the longest. I wonder what you expect to hear tomorrow.
Well, a few things are worth thinking about. The kind of golden ticket, Nicole, for this committee is to establish some sort of connection between the radical elements that that stormed the Capitol, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, people of that nature, and the White House. I'm not sure they're going to be able to do that. I'm not sure that that's in their plans. That's something to keep an eye on. Furthermore, I'm most interested, Nicole, to be honest with you, on something that has not really been foreshadowed, but it's something that is a recent development, which you mentioned in the opening, which is Pat Cipollone, the former White House counsel, his testimony behind closed doors. Now, I've spoken to people close to Cipollone who have made the case to me that part of the reason he wanted to speak out, part of the reason why he didn't completely fight this the subpoena was because he wanted to be seen as part of that quote unquote team normal or whatever they called it a couple of weeks ago. And I think a lot of what he said, from what I understand from people who are familiar with it, shed light onto what happened at the White House that day. And that's something that has not actually been in short supply over the last couple of weeks, but coming from Cipollone, who is such a critical element, someone that we've heard so much about over the last couple of weeks, is critical. And I think we'll get just a further view into that. Now, I would just add one thing. A lot has been made up here that Cipollone's not going to be testifying live in person. I really don't think that matters much. The committee has made such excellent use of videotape testimony over the last couple of weeks since this has begun that I imagine we're going to get a lot more tomorrow.
Yeah, and I mean, Carol, to Jake's point, we'd seen a whole lot of Cassidy Hutchinson before the nation met her live. I mean, even some of the most prolific. And I think Richard Donohue's testimony was almost equal parts taped, recorded depositions. Actually, that wasn't even filmed, and his live testimony. But let me show you, to Jake's point, let me show you what Stephanie Murphy said about what Pat Cipollone told the committee.
The Jeffrey Clark scheme, it was referred to that he called that a murder-suicide pact. Were you able to get that confirmed out of him?
He made very clear that he thought the Eastman theory, which was this idea that the vice president could somehow unilaterally declare the president-elect, or that the pressure on the Department of Justice, he sided with the Department of Justice on their findings of no fraud in the election. He made very clear that he took the side of many of the folks that you've already seen come before the committee, and was asserting that there wasn't enough evidence to prove that the election was not free and fair, and that, you know, the right thing to do, I think, for a democracy is to have a peaceful transfer of power, especially after December 14th, when the states have certified their electors.
Carol, there was so much noise around Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony in the presidential vehicle. Of course, Pat Cipollone wasn't in that vehicle either, but all of the buildup to Pat Cipollone was whether or not he would corroborate Cassidy Hutchinson. It's clear that the committee went back to the very first public hearing, and that was the illegality of the Eastman plot, the pressure campaign against Pence, Trump's knowledge of the illegality of the coup plot itself. And it sounds like, from what I've seen, they got much of what they wanted from Mr. Cipollone.
Well, they definitely, at least, Nicole, got a window into how Cipollone, a White House counsel, felt about the Hydra-headed, multi-pronged effort by Donald Trump to stay in power, even as he was told by Cipollone, by Bill Barr, a very good ally, by the way, of Pat Cipollone's was Bill Barr. They were in lockstep in their concern about what the former president was doing. So the committee clearly has gotten a lot of information about how the most senior White House advisor you can imagine, other than the chief of staff, felt about the legality and the appropriateness and the factual basis for the president's bonkers plan. And it took many forms. What I'm going to be watching for is how much did Pat Cipollone share about what he told the president? Because my understanding is that many times in this 8-hour interview, he cited executive privilege about what he advised or told the president. Keep in mind, another thing we all should be watching for in this Hydra-headed nightmare is the effort to seize the voting machines. Cipollone had a window into the maybe 3 different ways the president considered seizing the machines. Cipollone had a front row seat to the meeting that led ultimately, let me retract, the meeting that ultimately ended with President Trump sending a tweet in the middle of the early, dark 30 hours, come to Washington, will be wild. So Cipollone was part of that long meeting. He didn't participate in every hour of it because I think it lasted for 6 hours. But I'm going to be looking for how much did Cipollone tell them about that nutty meeting where Team Normal and Team Crazy had it out. And the president was so befuddled and angry about the fight that he ultimately took like a hour-long dinner break while they continued arguing over whether you could seize machines.